following and supporting what Yandere Dev is trying to do is he's trying to find I guess, the pure kind of dream of the game, which is all of these insane numbers and levels of features and complexity. Hey, I'm Demon Dev, and this is a continuation of yesterday's video of kind of bad code equals good. And this is specifically on kind of a defense of Yandere Dev. Now, there's a lot of interesting critiques and analysis of him. I think he's been scrutinized in a way that relatively few indie devs have, partially just because he has such a significant social media content creation on YouTube aspect to his development cycle, which is really fascinating, not just because it's extensive and he did it for so long and continues to, but that it's very emotionally connected to his kind of upswings and downswings in terms of struggles he faces from, mail to collaboration to figuring out who, he's paying for stuff, who he's not, it's really fascinating just how much he bears to the world and to his emotional, psychological, and design processes for making a very massive project. And anyway, so there's a lot of really fascinating and in-depth videos where people break down things that he's doing poorly, or priorities missed, or extensive personal issues, or treatment of people that he's tried to collaborate with. A lot of really interesting things. One of those, and I watched a lot of those videos because I, like a lot of people, find it really fascinating to see so much of what goes on behind the scenes, or seems to, with the indie developer. But one of the things that I find myself bothered by is all the criticism that revolves around pointing out how bad his code is really interesting. First off, because there isn't that large of a consumer base for criticizing programming anyways, because in order to say whether code is bad or not only do you need to know generally about programming, but you would have to know in the context of whether it's used, whether the importance of, code being done in an elegant or, well, long-term designed way will matter. But there's a lot of, kind of, I would say, clickbait criticism against his programming style and abilities, which seems a little bit more toxic than constructive. I think that anyone who's seen, a bunch of, if else statements in a row, knows, and has programmed some themselves, knows that it, you know, is a bit of a slippery slope in terms of, how far can you push relatively basic organizational coding structures before it becomes totally unmanageable. And that's a valid point, but within the context of indie game development, where it's a miracle that any project comes across at all, and most game projects come across at all using significant teams, even at the indie level, it's rare to have a game with the feature set that Yandere Dev aspires to make and has made. It's less so than the number of features that he has yet to make and more incorporate and clean up. But anyways, it's rare to have so many features developed by so few people, and especially just one person. I know that there's been, different, I guess, attempts that he's made, or significant collaborations. I'm not exactly sure, with one other programmer, and from my understanding, it didn't go too well. But the really interesting thing about the criticism is that it's like, okay, within the context of indie game development, there should be really gross code. Now, a lot of the criticism is, okay, yeah, it was maybe okay for the code to be bad at the beginning, but now he has to refactor. The frames per seconds are really low. But I'm still, I guess, prioritizing, well, maybe that's still not a priority. I think what a lot of people are frustrated by, and maybe rightly so, is that he's still looking to add features. I don't think he's reached the point of feature complete where it makes sense to, other than, getting it to run well enough to develop in, which at some points it hasn't, and then he has refactored at those points, it seems like the compile times were too long or something like that. But probably by now he has a strong enough computer where he can ignore those issues even longer, which I think may be a good thing. I don't think he's feature complete in any systemic way. Like, you're never feature complete in a sense when you're doing indie dev because you're struck by new things or new applications with the same features that you want to add. But like in a general category sense, until you've locked down all the things you want to happen in your game, significant refactor or kind of redos of your code uh, lands in a debatable territory. It's certainly possible that it would be worth it for him to refactor, but he has refactored a lot of times, and probably he's refactored the most important scripts, the ones that he has to deal with the most. Do you necessarily need an elegant system to swap out outfits and hair or weapons or stuff like that? Well, maybe. I mean, certainly if we're looking to AAA as our example set, where you're dealing with hundreds of each, and with such a significant memory burden that if you don't treat it well, then the game won't work at all. Okay, sure, you need relatively comprehensive systems for that. But for the Yandere simulator, or I think he may have changed the name that he's calling it or considered it. Even with a number of hairstyles and stuff, with this relatively low poly art style and all of that, it may not be a significant obstacle to have that memory optimized or anything like that. A Boolean statement might be fairly easy to interact with, and though it may not look so pretty and maybe takes a couple hundred extra lines that is necessary, it may not be a priority for that to work like a perfectly oiled machine. There's a great temptation for all programmers, myself included, to make a script run as fast as it can, but that's inefficient in a paradoxical way. To build in these efficiencies requires refactor or pre-planning to the point of slowing down the development process. And I think what almost everyone would agree, at some point during these breakdown videos, is that he struggles from the pacing progression being bringing it to a feature complete basis, where whatever that's going to be for him. Now maybe that means practically cutting back on features, but as long as his current goal or priority system is the inclusion of new features, adding rivals or adding different like significant characters with significant behaviors that they do and events you have to interrupt. As long as he's chasing after that, no, he shouldn't be refactoring his code. And a lot of people like to assign, flat universal rules to indie game development, such as, okay, well, you've been working on this 5 or 10 years, so that means that you must drop everything in order to release the game as soon as possible. But that's not a premise that really any indie game developers accept, even if they feel guilty or ashamed that the timeline of the project takes longer than they wanted it to. At the end of the day, what's most important is them prioritizing whatever they think is most important. Now, you can criticize those priorities. Maybe he should be cutting back on features, and maybe he should be beginning the cleanup process. But I think the truest form of criticism is where you put yourself in the shoes of the person making the decisions and you say, okay, if my priorities were the priorities that he's expressing, this is what he should do. And if his priorities are to, finish a rival or two and get all of their behaviors working correctly, he needs to release himself from the paralyzing shame and guilt of gross scripts that he seems to be working with in a lot of places, which he probably is. And I think most significantly long or heavily featured games suffer from some pretty gross, and gross, I just mean difficult to use and a bit glitchy scripts and, features. Yes, that's difficult, but it's not the priority. The priority is pushing features to a, reasonable testing phase where enough of it is blocked out or working out that you can commit yourself to a new stage of development. And I think that is the ideal way to proceed for, I would say most indie game development projects is you want to embrace the game jam spirit, the aggressive make a script sort of do what it needs to do just so you can get a feeling for, is this fun? Is this going to work? Or am I going to completely cut this feature? No one seems to talk about how much time is wasted on features that get cut. Well, clearly the features that get cut didn't need to be refactor optimized. That would have been an even more horrendous waste of time. And that's what, I think is happening here. People see him having worked on it for so long and gotten so much attention that they automatically convert that into being a betrayal of him not following through on releasing the game as soon as possible. But I think that following and supporting what Yandere Dev is trying to do is he's trying to find I guess, the pure kind of dream of the game, which is all of these insane numbers and levels of features and complexity. That's what he wants to pursue. And only when he's gotten that done, or I would say even blocked out, to a feature level, is he going to be ready, both practically and emotionally to move into another development phase. Now, that's worth criticizing, but coming at his individual scripts and codes, I think it's not just incorrect. I think it's incorrect if you come to the same conclusions that most people come to, which is that he's still adding features and he's not preparing for a release. If you take that as a given, then the individual scripts being bad or good is, way less of a roasting point, though. As my inner programmer feels, it's still fun to look at scripts that are, that promote some sort of like disgust. It's fun, and I do that with my own scripts with people sometimes too. But I don't think it's right, and I think it's not just wrong to criticize Yandere in this specific element, but I think it's actually toxic for the whole game development community, because what you have is a lot of people working on their projects, and they're very insecure about every aspect of their game, including the programming. And programmers can be especially harsh because they think that it's a solved game. It's like math. This is good, this is bad. Therefore, if this is bad, then I should point it out and you should fix it and be thankful for the fixing. But no, it's actually, there's a lot more art to programming than people think. There's a lot more creativity. And part of that creativity is a destructive, I guess, will to allow bad scripts or inefficient systems to exist because your priorities are in order. You've got, hopefully, some of the most important priorities focused on, and a script that runs fast in the grand scheme of things isn't that important. One, because optimizing scripts actually is something that you can collaborate with other programmers a lot easier than core design and the initiative seeking process of trying to get new features built. I strongly believe that if Yandere Dev gets to a point where he's happy with the features, as far as like more features would fall into those categories and not require significant, entire game altering systems. Once he gets to that point, I think he would be able to hire or work with a programmer that could go through his scripts and both understand the intent and the meaning of them and optimize them so that the game would run at whatever frames per second or at whatever reduced amount of glitchiness that it needs to. I don't think that's a big deal. And the quality of life aspect may be a big deal, to the point of which he is unable to add new features because of how slow or laggy things get could be an issue. But it seems like that's less of an issue. He has refactored when that has become so much of an issue. It seems like he respects that part of the process. Anyways, just some thoughts. I think that it's been long time overdue since someone maybe pushed back a little bit on hating literally all the things that Yandere Dev is doing. There's plenty of things that he is worthy of criticism on, but the individual scripts being like bad or whatever, or representative of bad programming ability, is a toxic way of criticizing an inspirational indie game developer. All right, have a good one. Thank you.